Next year, April 21, 22, 23, put X's on it now, so you go, I can be there. It's worthwhile. What you typically have, speakers that can take complex ideas and share them in a way that you can actually understand what they're talking about. That's why we bring them in. They're good. They're very good. Bill Salus is no exception. He just takes a topic that so many people just kind of put up their hands and go, yeah, there's so much. It's so complex, I don't get it. He takes a complex subject, he breaks it down in a way you can understand it. I said before up here, he's encyclopedic in his understanding of this. I believe that. I said before, a lot of people talking on end times. I don't think there's anybody better than the guy that you're going to get here today. I really don't. I really believe that. He's a friend. I not only respect him, I trust him. He's good at what he does. And I guess something even more important to me, theologically, our people come from a whole lot of different places and spaces. He's on the same page we are on theologically, which just means you don't have to run from what he's saying. You're in for a treat. Bill, God love you. God bless you.
Carl, thank you so much for that introduction. I was here a few years back. How many of you were here when I was here a few years back? It's great to see you again. We made it through a crazy pandemic. So I'm going to be talking about Bible prophecy today. That's my area of expertise. I want to start by telling you a little story about a Christian university had asked a Bible prophecy expert to teach a class on Bible prophecy. So on his first day, he came into the class and he asked this question: can any of you students tell me, what is the two main problems when it comes to Bible prophecy in Christianity today? And nobody was paying attention. They sort of seemed apathetic to the question. So he said, listen, let me say it a little louder. Can any of you tell me what are the two main problems when it comes to Bible prophecy in Christianity today? Still no response. So he sees a young student fidgeting with a cell phone in the back. He goes, young man, could you please put the cell phone down and stand up and answer the question, can any of the two main problems in Christianity with Bible prophecy today? And the young student was frustrated. He goes, I don't know, and I don't care. And the professor said, exactly, thank you. That is the problem in Christianity today with Bible prophecy today. People don't know, and people don't seem to care, a lot of people. But Bible prophecy occupies about a third of the Bible, predictive information devoted in the Bible. And God didn't do that so people wouldn't know about it and not care about it, but to equip people for the days in which they live. And ancient Bible prophecies are about to roll off their parchments and pound down on the pavement. And they will pack a powerful global punch. So we're already seeing a lot of these things stage setting right now. I'm going to be talking about one prophecy today, which is a marquee Bible prophecy of the end times. It's the one God is going to use to make the world know, put them on official notice that he's the one true God. And it's stage setting before our eyes right now. So I'm going to start with a presentation, if we can get there. It's going to be the Ezekiel 38 prophecy when God defends Israel. This is a teaching from a 3-disc DVD back at my table that just came out this year, professionally produced by Prophecy Watchers Studios. So we'll talk about Ezekiel 38 when God defends Israel. I want to start by telling you that there's 52 verses in Ezekiel 38 and 39. They're very descriptive. You can take them very literal. God made it simple to understand because he wants people to know what's coming. This is a marquee prophecy. So we have these 15 participants in the prophecy. We're going to list them for you. The first participant is the victor. That is God. He is going to actually win a war on behalf of Israel. The intended victim is Israel. The invasion is coming against the land of Israel. The invaders include 9 populations by their ancient names in Ezekiel's vocabulary of his time: Magog, Rosh, Meshech, Tubal, Persia, Ethiopia, Libya, Gomer, and Togarmah. We're going to put them on a map so you can see their modern-day equivalents. Then you have these 4 groups of protesters on the sidelines: Sheba, Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish, and their young lions. And I'm going to provide arguments, archaeological, historical, biblical, and geopolitical, why the Tarshish would likely be the UK, and among the young lions would be the USA. This might be where we find our country in Bible prophecy. So first, let's put a face on who are these belligerents. In Ezekiel 38, 1 through 6, he lists the invaders. You see a map up there with their ancient names, and off to the left you see the names of those countries and places. You have Russia is the leader. Gog and Magog would be up in the Russia area. Gog would be the leader of this confederacy. The southern steppes of Russia, some of the breakaway republics of the Soviet Empire, the Tajikistans, the Kazakhstans, the Stans, as they're called. Some people even give Afghanistan an honorable mention. This is a general consensus among the scholars today of who these countries are by these ancient population names. Turkey is at the top of the list. Iran is at the top of the list. Now, what's interesting right there is you have communist Russia aligning itself with Sunni Islam Turkey and Shiite Islam Iran. So you got three different strange bedfellows. Sunni Islam and Shiite Islam are two different factions within Islam, and they sort of compete amongst each other. But then you get in, once you get down from Turkey on, those are predominantly all Muslim countries. So this is a predominantly Muslim coalition. It includes Ethiopia, Sudan, North African countries we got here, Somalia, Libya, Algeria, probably Morocco and Tunisia as well. So these are the invaders that are going to come together in this massive coalition to invade Israel. They form, on a different map here, an outer ring of countries. You'll notice that they don't share any common borders with Israel. They're all external in this outer ring. They've never been Israel's notorious enemies, but at some point they're going to come together to invade Israel for a specific motive, which I will be sharing with you in just a moment. Now, I want to compare this to a different prophecy called Psalm 83, where there's an inner circle. Now, none of these countries in the inner circle were listed in that outer ring. And these are all the countries that's listed their ancient names in Psalm 83 prophecy, superimposed upon their modern-day equivalents. And they would include Syria, Damascus is there, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. Of course, you got the Hezbollah and Hamas involved. The Palestinians are involved. They form an inner circle around Israel. They're Israel's notorious enemies from time immemorial. They fought against Israel in 1948, again in several wars, subsequently in 67 and 73. I'm going to allude to this prophecy a little bit, but I think I talked about this when I was here last time. But it will play a role in a little bit of my talk today. Now, we're looking at some indicators that the Ezekiel 38 prophecy is starting to come at us pretty quickly now. The stage is being set for it. You see that the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, with Erdogan of Turkey and Rouhani of Iran, they've been meeting several times in summits in Sochi, Russia in 2017, Ankara, Turkey in 2018, Tehran in 2018, and then in February of this year in Sochi, Russia again. And what they're meeting upon is the Syrian revolution, the war that was going on in Syria. They had interests at stake in there, each three of these countries. Now that that war is wound down, that revolution is worn down, and America is withdrawn, they're seizing the opportunity to form this alliance so that they can protect their individual interests inside of Syria. So this has been a catalyst to draw these relationships together. Never before have they been so close in national relationships, which is one of the indicators why we're watching this prophecy very, very closely. Also, Iran and Russia has contracts with Iran to build more nuclear reactors in this area that you see shaded over there on the west coast. There's a Bashar 1, a nuclear reactor, but Russia's going to build Bashar 2 and Bashar 3, and they have a $10 billion contract to build these nuclear facilities. So the point being is that Russia and Iran have solidified their relationship even more now with these nuclear contracts. Now I want to show some parallels between what's happening in Ukraine with the Gog and Magog, the Ezekiel 38 prophecy. Here's a headline: Russia invades Ukraine on multiple fronts in a brutal act of war. This is an unprovoked war. And we're going to see that there's some common denominators in Ezekiel 38 that we see happening here with Russia. Now, Russia's saying that they invaded Ukraine because they didn't want Ukraine to become a member of NATO and the European countries and America, so that would make the West move closer toward the borders of Russia. So they're trying to push out against that. But there's ulterior motives in Vladimir Putin's mind, because Ukraine is a breadbasket of Europe. It is for about number 2 in natural gas and oil, although most of that's untapped. They're 4th in wheat production for the world, and 5th with Russia and Ukraine in corn production throughout the world. Russia's interested in that bounty, that plunder and that booty, which is another motive we're going to look at in Ezekiel 38. So what we have now is a Russian president in the latter days, invading a country that's unprovoked. He's got evil thoughts, and he's moving forward in this. We're going to see that this seems to have a parallel with Ezekiel 38. We're told in Ezekiel 38, verses 10 through 12, Gog's evil plan. Now, Gog is the name. It says Gog of Magog will lead this invasion. Gog would be the title of a president or a prince. It's a title of an individual, a leading individual. So we'll say a Russian president. Here's what it says. Thus says the Lord God, on that day, and this is a latter days prophecy, the latter years, it shall come to pass that thoughts will arise in your mind, and you will make an evil plan. And you will say, I will go against the land of unwalled villages. I will go to a peaceful people who dwell safely, all of them without walls and having neither bars nor gates. And that's what Russia has done in Ukraine, a peaceful people who were dwelling securely that they thought until this all happened. It goes on to say, you're going to go there to take great plunder. And again, remember the breadbasket of Europe, Ukraine. Though we're talking about Israel. To take booty, to stretch out your hand against the waste places that are again inhabited, and against the people gathered from the nations, that would be the Jewish people, who have acquired livestock and goods, who dwell in the midst of the land, the promised land of Israel. So Ezekiel 38, we believe, us who are watching this closely, is stage setting. It looks like it's going to be happening probably in our lifetime, probably in the near future, in this generation. But there are some prerequisite conditions that have to be fulfilled for this prophecy to find fulfillment. Biblical prophecies are very detailed, and they are fulfilled precisely with 100% accuracy. So here's a few preconditions. The Jewish people have to be regathered from the nations in the latter years, brought back from the sword of persecution into Israel, a land which had long been desolate. And we'll put check marks right there because those conditions have been met. Israel was desolate from 70 AD when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and the second Jewish temple to 1878 years later to 1948 AD when Israel was renamed Israel by the United Nations and they became the Jewish homeland again. So I would say that those conditions have been met, but what about these other ones that follow? It'll be a peaceful people living in a land of unwalled villages, dwelling securely without walls, bars, nor gates, having silver and gold and acquired livestock and goods, possessing booty and great plunder, because that's what's going to motivate Russia and their hordes that come against Israel. Now we're talking about Russia's going into Ukraine on their own, but this invasion that's forthcoming against Israel in Bible prophecy involves all those different nations. Approximately 2.5 million troops are available through those nations presently versus Israel, who's only got 175,000 troops. It's a very formidable, massive, armed and dangerous Mideast invasion, the most of all times. And you're going to see why God has to get involved in that and defeat those enemies. But are they living in a land of unwalled villages without walls, bars, nor gates? Well, absolutely not at this point in my estimation. They have a partition wall that's about 403 miles long. At some point, it's 20 feet high, filled with concrete. It runs through Israel, right in the middle of Israel. It's intended to keep Palestinian terrorism out of Israel proper. So that wall exists inside of Israel, but there are other walls on the borders of Israel. There's a wall to the north on the border of Lebanon and Israel where Hezbollah is located. And Hezbollah is a terrorist organization that was established by Iran, and they hate Israel, and they have 150,000 missiles pointed at Israel, and in the next war, they boast that they could lob 2,000 missiles a day. Some are precision guided, and they could hit key targets inside of Israel, like the Ben Gurion Airport, the Dimona nuclear reactor. They could take out Tel Aviv. So that's a big threat. Israel's building a wall there. Here's a headline from the Times of Israel in September 2018. There's a 30-foot tall border wall goes up. And the Israeli Defense Forces say that Hezbollah and the Lebanese army are colluding, meaning that the Lebanese army and the Hezbollah are sort of becoming more and more meshed together. So Hezbollah is becoming more and more like the national army of the country of Lebanon. The article goes on to say the Israeli military this week publicly unveiled it's 11-meter long, 9-meter tall concrete border along the Lebanese border. And that's roughly about 7 miles long and at some points 30 feet high. They did this, the concrete barrier is designed to serve two main functions: to protect Israeli civilians and soldiers from sniper attacks and to prevent infiltration into Israel by Hezbollah operatives. Now remember, in the olden days, they would build walls to protect against infiltration, against invaders. And of course, at this point, you have Hezbollah is wanting to do a ground invasion in their next war. They've already boasted about that. This will make it more difficult for them. They've been building tunnels underneath these walls, but they've been caught doing that, as has the Hamas in the Gaza area. They've been building tunnels. They got caught doing that. I mean, it's a very active situation Israel is very concerned about. They're not dwelling securely because of these things. They're building walls as a result. A couple more points on this. Driving home the fact that they're not dwelling without walls. A couple headlines. This is a different wall on the border with Lebanon at Metula. Israel completes the Lebanon border wall around Metula. That was back in 2012 that they built that wall. They're actually even going out into the Mediterranean Sea, building a barrier in the sea. This is back in 2018 to prevent the Hamas who are in the Gaza from coming around in the ocean to infiltrate and invade Israel from the southwest. The Palestinian protesters, of course, there's barbed wire fences and walls keeping the Palestinians out from the West Bank coming into Israel in some places. So there's security checkpoints, there's fences, there's walls. And there's also a wall on the east side of Israel on the southern border with Jordan. Now, Jordan has a peace treaty with Israel. Why are they building a wall? Well, it turns out that Jordan has a population of 10 million, and half of those are Palestinians. About 2.5 million of those are Palestinian refugees. And frankly, they don't like Israel. So Israel's got to be protected from that as well. So the point being, in the Middle East right now is the most fenced in and fortified region in the world. And inside of the Middle East, Israel is the most fenced in and fortified and walled up countries. You can see the list there of what's existing fences and walls and what is being proposed. So it's a very hot spot filled with insecurity and walls and borders to protect against that insecurity. And Israel is at the top of the list of that. Are they dwelling securely? Because that condition has to be met. 2 times were mentioned in Ezekiel 38:8 that they would dwell safely or securely. In Ezekiel 38:11 they would dwell safely or securely. The Hebrew words, we break them down, they say yeshag v'tak, which means you get a security militarily. You've defeated your enemies around you, so now you can dwell securely and you can tear down walls. And that's what Ezekiel is telling us. But Ezekiel, clearly these walls are up there for a purpose. They've got Arab enemies around them, terrorist populations surrounding them. That's why they have these walls. They don't dwell securely. So we have to ask ourselves, when will Israel dwell securely? Because that's a key as to when this prophecy can find fulfillment. So we ask Ezekiel to turn back the pages to 10 chapters before, and he tells us exactly when Israel will dwell securely. Ezekiel 28, verses 24 through 26 says this: Thus says the Lord God, when I have gathered the house of Israel from the peoples among them who they were scattered, and am hallowed in them in the sight of the Gentiles, then they will dwell in their own land which I gave to my servant Jacob, and they will dwell safely there, build houses and plant vineyards. Yes, they will dwell securely when I execute. But here's the key. When will they dwell securely? He says, when I execute judgments on all those around them who despise them, then they shall know that I am the Lord their God. So Israel has been regathered back in the land, and they will dwell securely, but not until judgments are executed upon those around them who despise them. And there are people around them who despise them, that need judgments executed upon them. And they're in that inner circle of countries that have been warring against Israel. They don't like Israel. Israel's still at war with Syria. And Hezbollah's up in Lebanon. You got the Palestinians in there. You got the Hamas in the Gaza. These are the people around Israel that despise them. The judgments will need to be executed upon them. And that's why I believe Psalm 83 is a prophecy where Israeli defense forces go to war against these countries. They win that war, and then they can dwell securely, expand territorially, and gain more plunder and booty, and tear down the walls. I have a book on Psalm 83 in the back. But we want to move forward and see if America is in this prophecy. Who are these people barking on the sidelines? It says in Ezekiel 38, verse 13, there's these protesters. There's 4 of them. Sheba, Dedan. The merchants of Tarshish and their young lions will say to you, speaking to the Russian leader and the Russian coalition, have you come to take plunder? Have you gathered your army to take booty, to carry away gold, to take away great plunder? So you see the arrows down at the bottom. Sheba would be Yemen. Dedan would be Saudi Arabia. They're among the list of protesters. But where is Tarshish? This is a key. And remember, it says right there, the merchants of Tarshish, not the politicians, not the entertainers, not the athletes, but the merchants, not even the military. So we've got to say, well, these people seem to be concerned about and have commercial interests in Israel. And we see the motives of Russia also voiced by these protesters. They're coming to harm those commercial interests. They want to take away Israel's prosperity, their plunder, and their booty. So let's take a look at the arguments. I'm going to present to you why I believe the UK is Tarshish and America is among the young lions. There are two trains of thought as to who the young lions of Tarshish are and who Tarshish is. Some people say that Tarshish is Spain. They use the word Tartessus, which was in Greek mythology. We don't really know whether it's a river or a city or what, so it's really hard to pin down that this has anything to do with Tartessus, with Tarshish. But if that is the case, the lions villages that came out of there, the colonies, would be South America and the Latino countries and Central America. You're going to see as I present my arguments that argument, Spain is going to kind of fall off the list of candidates, and South America as well. The other argument is it's the UK, and the young lions would include like Australia or North America, United States, and also Canada. But the theme, like we said, is this is dealing with the merchants of Tarshish, concerns about Russia's motive to come down with its hordes to take away Israel's prosperity, and they're very concerned about that. So I'm going to start to present to you some biblical and historical and archaeological and geopolitical reasons why I think we can rely on the fact that the UK is Tarshish and America is among the young lions. So let's start by who is Tarshish, biblically speaking. We're told in Genesis 10 that Tarshish, and it was the son of Javan, and that by these descendants of Javan, Elisha, Kittim, and Dodanim, by these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, everyone after his tongue, after their families and their nations. So we're talking about isles. Now, Spain's not an island, but the British Isles are big islands. There's 6,000 islands in the British Isles. 136 of them are populated. And, of course, England is the most populated among them. The theme of Isles of Tarshish shows up 4 times in the Bible, so clearly we can connect Tarshish with islands. And a large grouping of islands would be, the British Isles would certainly fit that billing. So many archaeologists have said that they believe Tarshish, going back through history, is beyond the Gibraltar. So the Strait of Gibraltar, you see it up on this map, it separates the Mediterranean Sea from the Atlantic Ocean. So Tarshish would be beyond that. You go up around and up to the north, you have what's up there is the British Isles. What was Tarshish known for historically? Well, they were known for merchandise and being merchants. Well, remember, it's the merchants of Tarshish in the theme of Ezekiel's prophecy. Here's one, 7 times they're mentioned as merchants with riches, great riches. And here's a really telling verse in Ezekiel 27, verse 12. Tarshish was thy, and he's speaking about Tyre, which is in Lebanon, merchant by reason of the multitude of all kinds of riches, with silver, iron, tin, and lead. They traded in thy fairs. So I want you to recognize that one of the big products and merchandise cargo that Tarshish had that was benefiting the Middle East, especially Lebanon, was silver, iron, tin, and lead. These were important metals that Tarshish was producing and exporting. They also had the ability to transport this cargo, we're told in the Bible. 9 different times they were told about that they were the ships of Tarshish. Here's one verse in Ezekiel 27. The ships of Tarshish did sing of thee in thy market, and thou wast replenished and made very glorious in the midst of the seas. So they were renowned historically in biblical times to have seaworthy ships could travel long distances and carry a lot of cargo, merchants of Tarshish. Again, that could explain why they come from the British Isles beyond the Gibraltar on into the Middle East. I write this in my Now Prophecies book, which is back there on the table, about the tin and the metals. About 587 BC, Ezekiel acknowledged that tin was among the primary metals that came from Tarshish. Cornwall, a county on England's rugged southwestern tip, was the only major source of tin in Europe. for the past 2,500 years. Not Spain, but Cornwall and the coast of England. It's also true that the mountains of Wales, just north of Cornwall, had been a source of all the minerals and metals listed above in Ezekiel 27, verse 12. So we have another argument here that these metals from the merchants of Tarshish were coming not from Spain, but from the British Isles as Tarshish. Remember, when Ezekiel wrote about Tarshish, there was no Britain, British Empire, no British Isles. Those are terms that came into the world's vocabulary subsequent. This is really telling as well. There was a study done by the Heidelberg University in September of 2019. It was entitled The Enigma of Bronze Age Tin. And what it did was it examined aged tin from the 2nd millennium BC from Israel, Turkey, and Greece. And what they concluded is that the tin artifacts from Israel, for example, largely match tin from Cornwall and Devon, which are in Great Britain. I just told you about Cornwall in the last slide. So again, another evidence done archaeologically and historically that continues to point toward the British Isles from Great Britain. Now let's talk about the British Empire for a minute. They grew into an empire that controlled, by 1922, after centuries of being entitled the empire in which the sun never sets, meaning the sun would rise in the east and it would set in the west. And as the sun went over the whole planet, they had control or sovereignty over much of that planet and the peoples on that planet. And so here's what we had by 1922, 458 million people they controlled. It was about a fifth of the world's population back then. They had sovereignty over about 13 million square miles, which is about a fourth of the earth. You see the map there. So the British Empire is a big deal, especially coming into the 1922. In 1922, they won World War. They helped win World War I. And at that time, the British Empire and France moved into the Middle East because the Ottoman Empire, who had controlled the Middle East for 400 years, they were defeated, the Turkish Empire. So at that point in time, they established the Balfour Declaration, which said, now that the Middle East is freeing up, that Britain would send the Jews out of the nations of the world who had been dispersed in the nations of the world for centuries in the diaspora. They would send them back into their ancient homeland of Israel. That was what the Balfour Declaration called for in 1917, and that's what I believe God empowered the British Empire to ultimately do, but they didn't do that. The Arabs agonized and said, we helped you win against the Turkish Empire. You are beholding to us, and don't give Israel that homeland because they don't like Israel, that inner circle of those countries, of those populations. So what transpired, and I also want to show you one more thing about World War I. This is a poster that was trying to enlist the young lions from Australia, Canada, India, and New Zealand, enlist with the old lion. You see down there on the poster, it says, they're calling them young lions, and Tarshish, the old lion. Now, the United States is not in this list right here because we became independent about 270 years prior, but we were among the young lions prior to that. So Tarshish, the UK started losing its stronghold over the world as over 70 years it started to decline, because I personally believe that was because they didn't do what they were supposed to do. And by not sending the Jews into their land, they subjected 6 million Jews to the Holocaust and the extermination by Hitler. And we start to see the sun starts to set on the British Empire. But meanwhile, after what happened in World War I, we see that who moved into the Middle East? Well, you see the UK, I got them under the banner of Tarshish there. They were in control of Iraq, parts of Saudi Arabia, parts of what's modern-day Jordan, Israel, at that time it was called Palestine. But they had control over that, as did the French up there, you see, up in Syria. So they started having conflicts amongst the Arabs and stuff, and they started to divvy out the Middle East to what you know it as of today. Egypt became a state in 1922, Saudi Arabia and Iraq in 1932. You see Iran, the lists are up there. Iran used to be Persian until 1935, it was renamed. And you see Israel comes into being in 1948. So we see in modernity that the and geopolitical perspective now, we've looked archaeologically and biblically and historically. Now we see from geopolitical scenarios, Tarshish was deeply involved in modern history in the formation of what's going on in the Middle East right now. They were led into that whole process. We don't see Spain at all involved in modernity in the Middle East at all. So we're continuing to push Spain more and more out of the equation and elevating the UK and the British Isles more and more into the identity of Tarshish, ancient Tarshish. Well, because the British Empire didn't do what I believe they were supposed to do, called by God, the sun always sets now in the British Empire. This is what's left of the British Empire. About 90,000 square miles and 64 million people they're sovereign over, versus what they had in 1922. So by 1990, this is pretty much what had happened. Now, meanwhile, while the British Empire was declining in superpower status, we were emerging in the United States as a superpower. And we also are involved deeply, geopolitically, in the Middle East as a young lion. Our presidents have been involved in trying to bring peace between the Arabs and Jews. You see, in 1979, Jimmy Carter was the president, and he brokered a peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. Now, this is a fragile peace treaty. It won't uphold itself in Psalm 83, in my estimation. But it exists today, and the American presidents were involved in that. Bill Clinton in 1994 brokered a peace treaty between Jordan and Israel. Of course, Donald Trump tried to get the Abraham Accords going when he was the president. So you see, America has been very active, not Spain, very, very active now as a superpower that Israel trusts to try to broker peace in the Middle East. So again, another argument geopolitically that points to the UK as Tarshish and us among the young lions. Now the picture, though, is that if we're just with the UK, you understand the UK really couldn't fight Russia and 2.5 million troops on behalf of Israel to protect its commercial interests, because it's down to 64 million people. It's not a superpower anymore. The sun always sets on the British Empire. But why not America? We're still got the #1 powerful military in the world. But why are we barking on the sidelines when we have commercial interests at stake in Israel? It pictures America in a prophecy that seems to be we decline from superpower status. It could be that America is heading in a declination area as a superpower, just like the British Empire lost its superpower status. Here's another archaeological discovery that helps solidify this. J.R. Church wrote a book, Dr. J.R. Church, he passed away a few years ago. And in his book, The Guardians of the Grail, he writes, an inscription discovered in 1780 on a cliff above Mount Hope Bay in Bristol, Rhode Island. It contained an engraving that read, "Voyagers from Tarshish, this stone proclaims." It's believed to be inscribed around 533 BC, and Harvard University has found 5 locations within the United States where the merchants of Tarshish had colonies. Again, another strong argument that puts us in this prophecy in a protesting position. So if we are declining, and remember this, I would just say this, Supreme Court decisions over the last 60 years have sort of wiggled God out of, straight-armed God out of our country. We took away prayers. Some of you younger people may not know this, but in the 1960s, Supreme Court decisions took prayer out of the schools. They used to pray in schools. Took out Bible reading, used to read Bibles in school as part of the curriculum. 1973, there were abortions allowed in the Roe versus Wade case, Supreme Court decisions. Other decisions came on state and local, national levels to take the 10 Commandments out of public buildings. And then in 2013, the Supreme Court passed a monumental decision that they could not defend DOMA, which is the Defense of Marriage Act. They could not defend the constitutionality of one man being married to one woman, which is the biblical prescription. A man should marry a woman, not another man. That's not the biblical prescription. When you can't defend the constitutionality of definition of marriage, you then redefine marriage. And then in 2015, we had a Supreme Court decision called Overfeld versus Hodges, which approves same-sex marriages. Now, historically, when homosexuality enters into an empire, it is the last thing that leads towards its rapid decline. That's always been the case. I'm not trying to alarm you, but you will probably never see a reversal of that Supreme Court decision. What could cause America to decline? Could it be an international or domestic terrorism? Could there be an economic collapse? The Dow Jones is very volatile. It dropped to one of the farthest levels this past Friday in several years. Could it be an economic collapse? Could there be what's called an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse, launched above about 185 miles above our nation on a burst altitude where it's a nuclear weapon? Russia has this. They were concerned North Korea could even accomplish this. China has these nuclear weapons. And what they do is they launch it and it bursts up above the atmosphere about 185 miles up, and it spreads at the speed of light like a canopy and fries all the electronics underneath it. That would certainly set us back. Some people say it would set us back to the Stone Age for a little while. What about this? What if the rapture happened, if you're familiar with that? When Jesus comes to get his bride, believers in Jesus Christ, before the tribulation period, he catches them up to the clouds, and we're changed in the twinkling of an eye, and we're able to then go into heaven and to be with the Lord forever. America is the number one Christian country in the world. What if millions, I don't know how many we would say, but what if they're just caught up and all of a sudden you see the societal functions happen as the engineers and some of the politicians and some of the military leaders and the people doing our general societal functions just disappear? How would America respond to that? And who would be left behind but the unbelievers who, I won't get political, but the country could be a mess with bad leadership. So we go on with the prophecy, and because of the advance is so big with Russia, with all those troops, not like Ukraine, you're not going to see God intervene in the Ukraine war, but he's going to intervene because he's got a purpose for this war, this Ezekiel 38 war. And he's going to intervene with a great earthquake, and then every man's sword after that earthquake, they're going to panic, it's going to come against themselves. So they're coming from the uttermost parts of the north, we're told in this prophecy. And they don't speak the same languages. They're different countries, different languages. And all of a sudden this earthquake happens and starts to stop them in their tracks, and they start panicking. They start killing each other, and then there's pestilence and bloodshed, flooding rains, great hailstones, fire and brimstone. It's like an Old Testament military strategy of God's supernaturally. Now, can you imagine? Now, I believe this is a pre-tribulation prophecy, and I'll show you why I believe that. And as I conclude, we could be here for it, but we could be raptured before it, because the rapture is a signless event. It could happen in any time, and it could happen real soon as we see all the end-time signs converging. So we need to be ready for Jesus to come get his bride. That could happen at any given time. And if you don't believe in Jesus Christ, you don't want to get left behind. I have a book series out there that takes you from here to eternity, and in the middle of from here to eternity is called the tribulation period, with an Antichrist and a lot of Christian martyrdom at that point. But we're not going through the tribulation. The church is not appointed to the wrath, and Jesus delivers us from the wrath of the tribulation. So, but you don't want to flirt with the disaster of not being a believer right now, because you could be whisked up in the age of grace to be with Jesus Christ. So can you imagine people watching this on their favorite news channel, Fox, CNN, whatever the case is? Here comes Russia. They're coming down with all these troops. Their motive becomes clear. They're coming to take over the plunder and booty of Israel. And America and the UK are barking on the sidelines, going, "What are you doing, Russia? What are you, defenseless. They can't stop them." And neither can the Israeli Defense Forces. It's too formidable of an advance. And all of a sudden, bam, these cosmic events start to happen, these natural catastrophes happen. Can you imagine watching that on the news? Well, what's going to happen is they're going to come to a quick realization that that was the God of the Jews that stopped that battle. And he wants them to come to that realization because when that happens in the aftermath, in Ezekiel 39, verse 7, he says, "I will make my holy name known in the midst of my people Israel, and I will not let them profane my holy name anymore. Then the nation shall know that I am the Lord, the Holy One in Israel." This is where he puts the world on official notice. He's the one true God. Now, it requires two components of the Abrahamic covenant. So he's going to prove it's an unconditional covenant God made with Abraham 4,000 years ago, that he would have a chosen people forever, and they would have a promised land to live on forever. That goes on into the millennial kingdom. I have a book on that, when Jesus returns and reigns for 1,000 years. But so it says here, and he's going to do this when in the midst of my people Israel, meaning Hitler couldn't kill all the Jews, or this prophecy couldn't find a fulfillment. And Hitler planned on killing all the Jews. He was stopped, but unfortunately he did kill 6 million and exterminated them. But it also requires the land of Israel. I'm the Holy One in Israel, the promised land and the chosen people. Now Israel is in the land. The Arabs, of course, want to take the land. They want to have another Palestine, another Arab state, but that won't happen. And so you have the two ingredients, right? So it's another reason why we're thinking this prophecy is stage setting. Now, I also use this as a partial argument for a pre-tribulation fulfillment of Ezekiel 38, because God's going to put the world on notice He's the loving God. Because right around the corner, you have a tribulation period where an Antichrist is going to try to seek worship of all people. He's going to force them to worship Him. They won't be able to buy or sell unless they become part of His economy in this tribulation period. And I don't think God's going to go deep into the tribulation and go, oy vey, I wish I would have let everybody know about me before this happened, right? So I don't think God goes oy vey, by the way, but that's a Jewish thing. But it's my people Israel, He said. So it goes on, and in the aftermath, we got so many details in Ezekiel 38 and 39, 52 verses. It says that what happens is Russia's going to bring down all their best weapons with their hordes, probably atomic, biological, and conventional warheads, ballistic missiles, etc. They're going to bring them all down to harm Israel, but God's going to stop that, and Israel's actually going to use those weapons for good. They're going to burn those weapons and convert them to fuel. It says they won't be cutting down any trees. They'll be taking these weapons and utilizing them for energy purposes. Remember, they used to cut down trees to have firewood for heating and for cooking, but they're going to convert these weapons into fuel and energy. Now, you may not know this, but over the last 30 years, since the breakdown of the Soviet Union, when Russia had all those, and they still have a lot of nuclear weapons, but America's been harnessing and knows how to take nuclear weapons and turn it into fuel. We've been fueling cities in America for the last 3 decades since the breakdown of the Soviet Empire. So Israel will have that technology, if they don't already, to be able to use nuclear energy, nuclear weapons, and convert it into fuel. That technology already exists today. And then what happens is they will have a burial ground for all these, maybe a couple million of these troops that are stopped dead in their tracks. It's going to be called Magog, and they'll be burying these people for 7 months, the dead for 7 months. These are very descriptive details. I'm going to show you where I think this valley of Magog is. It doesn't exist just yet. It's going to exist in a valley east of some sea that won't obstruct travelers. But these are going to be, they got to bury them for 7 months. There's going to be contamination concerns. They've got to cleanse the land. It'll take them 7 months or so many soldiers to bury these people. And it says after they bury them, they're going to have a professional, like a hazmat team, coming and staking bones and things like that so they can do a final mop-up after that. That's another detail. I don't have it on this slide here, though. Now, I'm going to show you why I believe in just a minute why Magog, I believe, is east of the Dead Sea, which is now part of modern-day Jordan. And that's in the central part of Jordan, which is a vast wasteland for the most part. We'll get there in just a minute. But when this is all going on, Ezekiel says Israel gains world renown. The world is going to see God stop the Russian troops, the coalition. They're going to see Israel converting weapons to fuel, burying the dead in a place called Magog. And the world's going to go, wow, a little Jewish state. Look what's going on with them. The God of the Jews took care of them. He upheld His holy name. Now, the nations, it says the nations shall know I'm the Lord. Well, that's not a salvation thing. It's just that they're going to be aware, they're living in a supernatural time now. There's a God of the Jews, and the Jews we need to be watching for. There's still going to be a lot of anti-Semitism. But the way the Jews will respond is they'll be trying to cleanse the land and reinstate their Mosaic law, their ancient law. They're going to want to start to build their temple. There's going to be a third Jewish temple. That's in Bible prophecy. The reason I think we have a clue here that this happens before the tribulation is they're going to be burning the weapons for 7 years. Now, when you understand the tribulation period, it's compartmentalized into a first half of 3.5 years and a second half of 3.5 years. It's a great tribulation because it's even greater than the first half when God pours out His wrath on a Christ-rejecting humanity through judgments. But in the first half, you see on the bottom of the slide to the left, Israel is involved in a peace treaty. The Antichrist is on the scene at that point. He confirms a covenant between Israel and another party, and they feel that like they're living at peace, and they're doing their temple worship and sacrifices and offerings in their temple they'll have. So they can be burning weapons for 3.5 years. Now it says pseudo-peace because it's going to get broken in the mid part of the tribulation. It's a false peace. But they could be burning weapons for the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. That would account for 3.5 years of the 7. But in the second half, Jesus even said because what happens in the mid part is the Antichrist goes into the temple, he stops the sacrifices and offerings, sets up his image of the beast, called the abomination of desolation. And Jesus said, when you see that happen to the Jews, flee immediately to the mountains. He's talking about the mountains of southern Jordan. And he said, because we find out that the Antichrist is going to try to commit genocide of the Jews. Zechariah 13:8 says, 2/3 of the Jewish population will be cut off in the land. Zechariah 13:9 says, 1/3 of them will come through, as refined through the fire. They'll become what's called a faithful Jewish remnant. So they're not going to be, in the second half of the tribulation, they're not going to be stopping to burn weapons. They're going to be picking up a weapon, if anything, to use it to defend themselves, to flee out of there. So that puts us forward, let's fast forward into the first 3.5 years before the 7-year tribulation. They could burn weapons for 3.5 years before the tribulation, 3.5 years at the first half of the tribulation, and then they abruptly would stop at the mid part of the tribulation. That's why many scholars, Dr. Reagan, Dr. Ron Rhodes, and others, Mark Hitchcock, we believe that this is a sign that the Ezekiel 38 prophecy finds fulfillment 3.5 years prior to the tribulation period, at least that amount of time. So the valley of Hamon Gog, it's called the city of Hamon. It's east of some sea. Well, the Mediterranean Sea is a candidate, but east of that sea is Israel proper. And they're not going to be burying contaminated dead soldiers for 7 months right in the heartland of Israel. And you got the Sea of Galilee up there, but to the east of that is mainly mountainous area, not valleys. And that's where Syria is right now, which is a hostile country. So that's not a really good candidate. The Red Sea is way far down to transport all these hordes of Gog to bury them. Not a likely place. So the real likely candidate, in my estimation, is the Dead Sea. East of that sea is Jordan. I believe after Psalm 83, Israel annexed territory in Jordan. And that area right there east of the Dead Sea would not obstruct travelers. And it would be a good place for them to bury the hordes of Gog. I think that's where Hamon Gog will be after the Ezekiel 38 invasion that will be established. That's my personal interpretation of that. Now, what's another interesting phenomenon that draws us to think that this prophecy is about to find fulfillment real soon. Ezekiel goes on to say, God has him prophesy, speak to every sort of bird and at every beast of the field. Assemble yourselves and come gather together from all sides to my sacrificial meal, which I am sacrificing for you, a great sacrificial meal on the mountains of Israel, that you may eat the flesh and drink the blood of those dead soldiers. So he's saying to Ezekiel, start to assemble the birds so they can come be part of this sacrificial meal and feast the birds of prey, the vultures. Now, for that to happen, those birds can't be living in Canada or America. It'll take them weeks to fly over there. They have to converge on it right at the time of the event. And those birds are already being assembled right now. You're going to find out from some headlines here. Birds of prey and vultures that would normally make a migratory swing through Israel and then just go on to the next destination. They're actually nesting and establishing themselves inside of Israel. It's a phenomenon that's the world's eighth wonder. Here's a couple of headlines. Times of Israel, May 9, 2019. Egyptian vultures returned to Carmel Mountains after 60 years. Times of Israel in May of 21. Vulture thought extinct from Israel for 30 years, spotted twice in a month. Jerusalem Post, 2017. Israeli vulture population on the rise. May of 2007, going back as far as 2007, the Iraqi birds that made Aliyah, in other words, they're migrating from Iraq into Israel. Preparing for this sacrificial meal is what I think is being doing here. January of 2016, why Israel is a pilgrimage site for birds, and then a real telling one in 2017. Israel's 500 million birds, the world's eighth wonder. So I believe these birds are already assembling because this prophecy is going to happen probably pretty soon. And they got to be there on the spot, on site for this situation. So we have an outer ring in Ezekiel 38, which is a war that we see stage setting. But Israel can't dwell securely without walls, bars, and gates until they first deal with this inner circle of the Arab countries around them who despise them, that need judgments executed upon them. Now, when Israel wins that war, they will expand territorially into the promised land in portions of it that God gave to Abraham, the land of Israel. In Genesis 15:18, he says, I will give your descendants, Abraham, unto the Jewish people, from the river of Egypt, the Nile, unto the great river Euphrates, which courses through Iraq and Syria. That's about 36 Israels, the size of Israel today, which is about the size of New Jersey. Now, they're not going to, I don't believe they're going to get all that land until Jesus returns and establishes his kingdom in the millennium. But I believe they will take over and expand. I got prophecies I talk about in my series back there. Take over probably about this much land. They have a precedent for doing this. Joshua did it 3,500 years ago when they win wars. He expanded out of the land of Canaan. King David and Solomon did it 3,000 years ago when they win wars. And Israel did it in 1967. They about tripled their size. Okay, so I'm going to call it right here. I'm not going to get all the differences. I just want to sort of summarize because the time is up. As I said earlier, ancient prophecy is about to roll off their parchments and pound it on the pavement. Now, we could be raptured before any of these things that we're talking about, Psalm 83 or Ezekiel 38, and I'm really hoping that's the case. But we're seeing a world that's in turmoil. We're seeing a push toward a global order. That's also a Bible prophecy. We need to be aware of the prophecies in the Bible because they're intended to authenticate God's sovereignty, equip us for the days in which we live. They can spare our lives like Noah spared his family, Joseph spared his family. When he saw the famine was coming, 7 years of famine, he took 70 years of plenty to store for them. We can spare our lives if we know these things and equip ourselves, but it can also save souls. And that's how I came to know the Lord, through Bible prophecy. You can witness to people and say, look what's going on in the world. Did you know the Bible had something to say about that? So let's pray. Lord, we thank you for this time together. We thank you for this prophetic word that we are starting to understand. We thank you for all of your Bible. We thank you that you love us and that you sent your Son to die for our sins and to save us. We so much look forward to his return. We know that he yearns to come get us. He's waiting for you to say, son, go get your bride. But until that time, Lord, we are trying to occupy and redeem the time, looking for your glorious appearing, our blessed hope of our great God and our great Savior. So I pray that everyone here has been blessed and pleased with this message, that they would now be equipped and feel a little bit stronger and a little more secure that you're in control of the crazy events of this world. We ask your blessings in Jesus' name. Amen.